Hey there, John.
Hello, I assume this is canceled.
There was definitely a comment on the Monday meeting that everybody is at KubeCon will not be here. So I figured there won't be much, but I would show up just in case.
Hmm. That's what I figured.
But then the biggest tell for me was when I looked at the notes, Sasha is the one that copied in the agenda, the blank agenda at least. And he showed up just as we were signing off on the Monday discussion. So I was thinking we had 2 hours, the video sharing, all the people there, and he showed up just as we were leaving. So I wasn't sure if folks wanted recaps of that or if they had agenda items of their own. There are two somewhat interesting issues out there. I'll go digging them up. One is yours, but there is another one.
Which one's mine? Sorry.
Yours is the one saying, hey, do we really need to have these APIs required and all that stuff? And I've got opinions, but I want to see if we can find that middle ground because most of the spec has been written so far by people that aren't running the registries. And so the people that are running registries would be good to get you on board as well.
Yeah, some aspirational specifications.
Yeah, it would be useful if someone actually implemented it. The other one I've seen before is talking about adding a header on manifest and blob pushes and pulls so that you know what tag that the request is being associated with. So I'll put both of these in the agenda. We can chat about them unless people have other stuff they want to talk about. 358 and hey, look at that. 357 was yours.
I skimmed that issue and I just saw a bunch of civil back and forth. I don't know if, like, should I read it? I guess I can read it. I'm an adult.
Yeah, the header is interesting. The thought process they're throwing in there is, does this make sense for? I got the feeling they're trying to do tag level authentication or authorization, and it's interesting, and it's also feels like it's very error prone to me as well.
Yeah.
Because clients could easily lie and just say, "Hey, I'm pulling some other tag," but the from that point, they're saying, well, then the server is just going to validate all this. And I'm thinking, well, if you're going to validate all already, then don't you have the information you need without having the extra header? I guess it gives you some kind of lookup, a faster lookup, but still feels a little awkward there. But the flip side is because you can have one blob and multiple manifest, and maybe in a manifest that appeared long after the blob was pushed. You push V1, it has a couple of layers. You push V2, and it has 3 shared layers in it. Those 3 shared layers didn't know they were going to be in V2. So they're not going to report that, hey, I'm being pushed for V1 and V2 because V2 doesn't exist yet. But I also feel like I've seen this request earlier from other people saying they were interested in having a header in there.
Jason had something
Yeah. I think
very similar already.
I think I saw it. Maybe Go Container Registry had something there for it and it expired, and he was waiting on us to come up with an answer over here.
Yeah, 328 on distribution.
I'll link these two.
Kind of similar.
Let me put a link to this one so we're all talking the same thing, because I wanted to see his feedback as well. Oh, beat me to it. The part that I liked more about Jason's is that he wasn't just looking for a tag. He was saying, just give me the whole reference, which can potentially have a digest. It does have a repository in it.
Yeah, I think it's a little more useful because you can extract more information from it, right? So like, if you, depending on how you've architected your registry, this might be very nice. Whereas if you just have a tag,
Yeah.
then you have to figure out like, oh, where did this come from? Which
Now,
I think does.
in terms of doing this, though, if you have a multi-platform image, you're going to have the index, you're going to have the individual image manifest, and you're going to have the blobs. When you pull the blob, which header do you put in there? Which manifest do you say this is associated with? The one the blob was in, or do you go back to the parent of the multi-platform manifest? Or do you say the tag of the multi-platform manifest? I feel like people want different things depending on how they're going to use it.
Hmm. Yeah, it's kind of like it's like a forwarded header. You have like
A
a
list.
stack of like how you
Yeah.
traversed to get there. That I find that reasonable.
Well, you can either do is it a comma separated list, or you can just have the same header multiple times, I think.
Yeah.
Either of those work.
I'm thinking about what's happening for like the registry for Kubernetes. Um, like you can pull from case.gcr.io. And right now, depending on where you are, you will either get served or you will be forwarded to registry.case.io. And depending on where you are, you will be forwarded to some regional artifact registry image or even just S3. So like that is a stack of redirections that would be kind of interesting to maintain. I don't know that we want clients to have to like know that they've been redirected to a different place and construct this header. Unfortunately, I don't know if I want that really.
If it's HTTP forward, I would think we don't want to do that. If we're going through the manifest layers, though, I can see some values to that.
Yeah, yeah. I guess it would be useful to have like, oh, this was the original thing I requested. I know there's some already like mirroring stuff where containerd puts the host in the query string, but this would also be useful.
I can see it useful for logging. I feel like it's less useful for pushes because on the push, you can push multiple images at the same time. And so are you going to be doing some decision logic saying, well, he's pushing 3 manifests, one of the manifests is good, so we'll accept it. I don't know how that all works, how that all would work. There's also thoughts of tying this in with some of the auth discussions that will come up later on. So we shall see. So that was one on your issue. We're talking about, hey, do we want to just swap it out to a data field or something else? The biggest fear I get with the data field is I'm like, this is going to end up getting dropped by registries. As soon as you say may, maybe excluded or something like that, or registries may have some threshold.
Yeah, so it's tough because like I'm arguing from both perspectives. One of which is more my professional perspective than my casual perspective. But like the reason we're lifting these annotations up into the response is like efficiency, right? Or maybe it's just so clients can be lazy, but assuming it's efficiency, the client isn't really in a position to know what is efficient versus what is not. Whereas the registry could say, oh, hey, actually, I would prefer you send me like one giant request versus 1,000 smaller requests. Like the cost of each request is hard for a client to determine, but really easy. Well, maybe not easy, but possible for a registry to determine. For example, like perhaps for small manifests, they get stored inline in some easy to query database, but for larger ones, they get punted out to blob storage. And so certain manifests can be easily embedded in the response, whereas others require n+1 queries on the back end. So like either the registry is going to do n+1 requests or the client's going to do n+1 requests. And those are like, in my opinion, it's nicer to punt that back to the client because then not like the registry doesn't have to buffer a bunch of stuff to construct the response. That's kind of my, I actually didn't completely finish reading your response, but that's like where my head is at for this.
Yeah. Yeah, the hope that I've got is ideally I like to see the registry server only have to construct that list once. Or at least once for every time artifact is uploaded associated with a manifest of some kind. So every time they see a new subject, they might have to go out and update that list once. And then now you've got that to push down to push down anybody querying it. Theoretically, you could do some caching with that data, get it shipped down to the client, and then you're not using the network as like a go-between. Like I feel like the network to me is going to be the slowest part of this whole transaction going over the wire. And so if we can avoid having the client send a whole lot of requests when the server's already got the data, it already computed once, and then sent that down to the client can then be a whole lot more efficient of picking and choosing out from that list, saying, okay, I need these 2 artifacts and nothing else matters to me. And so they can avoid all the other requests over the network. That's my goal. Not sure how realistic it is. And part of it I'm looking at is saying, how can we still make this efficient for registries to implement on their side?
Yeah. And like what you really want is to push down that filtering into the query, right? Instead of like doing it client side.
There are people who like to push down to the query. I would be perfectly comfortable if you came back and said, meh, not going to implement that. It's an optional feature anyway. And it's not a huge value add to me at the client side because I'm already going to do it no matter what you do. So if I get 50 responses back instead of 3, is that a big deal to me? Not really, because for me doing the computation on that big response, you're talking a couple extra, another 100 bytes per extra entry in there. That's not going to take a long time to go through and do that. Not looking at a massive network slowdown or a couple 100 bytes there. That's my hope. One of the things that I really hesitate on of saying let's push it back to a whole lot of manifest request is because I don't want to upset Tina's company. Because at some point we're going to hit Docker Hub with 1,000 requests for one image. And that would not be a good day.
Is he gonna respond?
He's not going to respond. He's not doing the hub stuff.
I can neither confirm nor deny.
Yeah. But that's my fear is I don't want to blow the rate limit out just trying to pull a single image. And so the fewer manifest hits I can do, the better.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we'd need them to have perspective on this. Like, because if they're not going to implement some other thing, then it doesn't matter. Like, if the mechanism for annotations is something they're happy with, then it's fine, I guess.
Yeah, we need to get some other people on their side for Hub. Chime in.
I don't love having to like denormalize the database to make this efficient, by constructing this response on push or lazily on pull.
How much does that denormalize your database? Where I'm going with that is, do you even need to store the annotations in your database? Can we bypass that completely and say, store the response itself with a digest? It's an index. It's got a digest. It's throw it up there as a manifest for all I care. Not being mean or anything. I'm just saying, you got a spot that you can stick it. So you store your index with a digest. Whenever someone queries that API, you just say, hey, go pull this bit of data here or return that bit of data. And it's sitting right alongside of all the other manifest. And so now your response when someone queries that API is, here's the digest for that API response in your database. So that should be pretty efficient to get and to store. And now if you ever change it, you've got on the push, here's my manifest that I had to parse anyway because I'm validating the content of the manifest. I've got the digest of the original response, just pull that back, parse that one, add one more entry into it, and then resave it, get a new digest, put that in your database.
I don't love it because like if we're actually dropping manifests into this repository, they're like addressable things that the client could pull.
I'll let you hide it somewhere else if you want to, but I'm just throwing ideas out.
Yeah. I'm trying to make this as easy for me as possible, and you're trying to make this as easy for you as possible. So
I'm also trying to make it easy for you without making it hard for me.
Yeah.
And without upsetting people that want to query this on a registry, the rate limits manifest pulls. But I'm just throwing that out there as maybe there's a way to store this data that doesn't involve you storing every single annotation in a database. And if we can switch the problem around to that, then maybe there's an easy option there that makes the horrible implementation not so horrible.
Maybe.
I'm grasping at straws as best I can.
I still like my proposal, of course.
with the data field.
Yeah, I feel like it's kind of a nice.
I would be good with it if you said it's a mandatory data field. As soon as you say it's optional, that scares me.
But the nice part about this is that you're like forcing clients to be able to fall back to fetching it separately. Because like it opens up the path to like increasing the size limit on manifest, right? Where if clients expect that they might have to fetch this thing themselves, then they will. But if you have to embed it in the response, then you're constructing very large responses. And it's annoying to do streaming JSON responses.
I'm going to start putting all my layer blobs directly in the manifest JSON just for John.
Do it.
It's
all
my
5
fear right now.
gigabytes of Windows.
Now you can.
I mean, we said they should support up to. Doesn't mean you can't support bigger.
Right, but
doesn't mean you have to support if we go over.
Then I'm gonna return one result with a pagination token for you on each thing.
Yeah, artifacts feel like something to me that is prime territory for people to start using that data field in the child manifest, not in the response manifest itself, but in all the various child manifests that are created for each artifact. And so
I love
it. It's nice, but it worries me when you take all of those and then say, okay, all of that data now gets crammed back in this original API response, because I feel like that can start to grow pretty quick.
That's where I like this being a registry decision, because like if it does grow, you can drop it and just force the client to fetch the large thing. But if it is like literally a couple hundred bytes, which a lot of things will be, right? Then you save like 3 or 4 round trips, which is nice. Whereas like if you just have the annotations, you're only saving the one.
It's a question of how many of these are you going to fetch. If you're going to fetch every single one of them, then yeah, it's great to get the data field back and skip all those fetches. If you're only going to pull one out of the entire list, then it's a bummer to have pulled back all those other manifest in a streaming data thing. You only need one out of the whole list.
Yeah, it is a bummer.
It's all about use cases. Everybody's got a different one.
I stand with my current opinion. I would love more registry opinions, because like I know how I would have to implement this, but I don't know how everyone else would. So like maybe I'm the only one who thinks this is burdensome.
You're not the only one who thinks it's burdensome. So you're not alone there. I don't know how many people want to see it go to the data field though.
Sure.
I suspect you'll see a lot of pushback on that.
I would just rather do that than do something like strange like this.
The flip side is that if we start to change this, and we need to sooner rather than later, this is also the same response that you're going to get if you do the digest tag. And so we need to make sure these two still line up with whatever happens in the future. Of course, I'm already pushing this stuff now, but I won't say it's too late. I'll just be grumpy. So that's those two. For anybody that missed the Monday, we spent 1 hour going through all of the artifact support discussions and where everybody is with that. So some of that was talking about, hey, what registries are going to implement this, chatting about distribution doing their thing eventually.
Was that recorded by chance?
It was recorded, but you know where it's recorded, right? VBATs will eventually get to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so VBATS was there. He's probably a couple months behind on a lot of this stuff. So he's going to be very sad to go through and post all his recordings at some point.
I imagine.
Need to distribute that workflow. Let's see.
Yes.
All the notes are there. I'll repaste the link to the notes for anybody that wants to look.
We should just have all the meetings automatically be YouTube lives and they'll just be up. If anyone joins the meeting, it's just live.
I
OCI only lives once.
I think to do the live stream, one of the maintainers and someone that's got access to the YouTube account has to join the call and turn it on, because they do that for the CNCF security meetings. So that would mean we would need VBATs here. So what do we call the Monday meeting? Just the, let's call it the KubeCon meetup. So yeah, at the KubeCon meeting, we talked about that, looking at clients supporting it. Go container registry will be interesting. I think once they go, there's going to be a lot of projects using this that we care about. One project, but I think a very key one on the signing will pick up off of that. So if you have concerns, sooner rather than later, we got to sort them out.
This is mine. That's why I filed the issue.
Yeah. We chat a little bit about how to standardize some of these artifacts. Wow, Mike had a long discussion there. I keep thinking I'm out of his discussion there, just kept going. Talked a little bit about how to standardize this stuff. And the takeaway on that one, because if no one's seen it before, let me just move this to a new window and I can share it. It's easier to share a screen when this stuff is happening instead of assuming everybody knows what I'm looking at. Even make it bigger for you. So we were looking at, in addition to how we're going to go do the whole artifact V1 stuff, as we standardize some of the media types on things, kind of the concern I had was there's a method for pushing an SBOM to a registry using something like cosign. There's a potentially going to be a method to pushing an SBOM to the registry using SIFT. There'll be another one for probably Sneak. There'll be another one for, pick your tool. Every tool is going to have a method for doing it. And unless we standardize what the artifact type field is, what the blob media type field is, are they compressing this stuff? Are they packing multiple together? Would you see this up here saying this is the SIFT SBOM or the SIFT artifact and all the different SBOMs attached to that? Unless you do something standard between all the tools, then anybody checking this is going to have a real miserable time. Because you're going to have to support every single possible way you can push this up to a registry and then figure out how to pull it down and track, even when they're all the same pick SPDX JSON, contain blob. Even if those are all identical, it's still going to be different ways of wrapping it, which will get very miserable very quickly. So
this is very similar to the misery we already have with compression types on layers.
Yeah.
Where there's not a good way to support multiple compression types unless the registry somehow gets smarter. And now the digest doesn't match because it's on the compressed data.
Move it to the transport instead of the storage layer.
Yeah.
I'd like to see that too. We completely punted that when we talked about artifacts, but it would have been nice.
Yeah, sorry, I don't mean to bring this up to derail the conversation, but just to point out that we're already grappling with the results of this decision. So yeah, it would be really good if we thought about it more and maybe came up with a better solution for this new thing.
Yeah.
Somehow.
So it sounds like we're going to punt this one too, though. When we chat about it, the conversation came up and The response was, well, let's have the communities themselves generate this. We shouldn't be the standard setter. We should be the standard documentation follower kind of spec. And so it's going to be up to someone like Sigstore or whatever that's pushing their artifacts up to say, here's how we're doing it. They document, and then we kind of capture it over here. Not ideal to me, but that's kind of the direction they're pushing on their side. So at some point, we'll need to start capturing this, and that'll go up into the specs themselves of saying, okay, this is clearly not this one because this is a horrible option. I think we'll probably end up looking at either like a single manifest with a single blob for if you're going to push something like an SPDX JSON artifact. And then if you push an XML one next, or if you push a Cyclone DX next, each of those would be a separate artifact. And it didn't sound like people were too concerned about matching the artifact type and the media type of the blob to be the same thing. I was worried people might say, hey, it's if you put that as a media type, which shouldn't it be different because one's the artifact and the other's the blob, but no one really seemed to worry too much about that.
I worry.
We think alike. Or maybe I just took after all your concerns from before.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to understand what it means.
What is that media type? Yeah.
What does it mean?
What
like
is any?
If there's a single blob and they match, it's like, okay, that means something perhaps. We're just like hoisting this up so that we can index the media type of a single thing, and that seems fine. This is like very similar to my proposal around like allowing descriptors be put as manifests. If there's multiple blobs, then like the artifact type needs to mean something else.
Mm-hmm.
Like it has to be some type of collection type. It can't be one thing if there are multiple things it describes.
Which is interesting because when people have registered this stuff with IANA so far, no one's registered a collection media type with IANA. I don't think. Well, maybe they have, but all the like when you're documenting this in SBOM, they've registered the individual SBOM types and not the parent of, okay, here is the parent media type of all of these. Wouldn't hurt. They just haven't done it.
Yeah, Tina, like it. Do we have like different representations of the same thing, or do we have a collection of things that aggregate? These are two different possibilities for what that would mean. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, just like that's an example of something that came to mind when you mentioned that. Multiple blobs of maybe the outside is SPDX and the inside is JSON or XML, or maybe the outside is SPDX and the inside is multiple different SPDXs that are all for different bits of the image, or separate SPDX for each layer of the image that it's referring to.
Then you get into annotations, which they're needed to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What should a tool do if it's expecting a single blob and there's two?
That's
right.
Already an issue with SBOMs today because they want to generate the SBOM of here's the source code that I pulled down, here's the build environment I built it in, here's the compiled container with everything in there, and maybe the SBOM of the base image that the container was built on top of. And right now they're looking at how do you merge them all together into a single SBOM, but there might be some value to shipping those as individual SBOMs. So yeah, the endpoint for this one was that we're going to push off on us being too prescriptive on our side and waiting until people start to use this and they tell us how they're using it. And then we'll just start documenting that.
don't love that. Because like we are being prescriptive already.
Yeah.
So it's like here's this thing, here's this toy, and then there's like, oh, we use it this way. It's like, oh, that's dangerous. Or like,
Yeah.
you're using it inconsistently. Wrong.
They'll find a way to do something crazy.
Yeah. I mean,
thought-
like, if you were going to represent an image with this, like, what would that look like? You know, what would the artifact type of an image be? I suppose the config blob.
So if you're pushing an image, you shouldn't even have. You shouldn't be pushing the image itself. Are you talking about a picture? Are you talking
No,
container image?
I mean, like, imagine we don't have the manifest type, right? And like, this is the
Okay.
only thing we have, and it's a collection of 2 at least different kinds of media types. How do you represent that?
Yeah, at that point, the artifact type would be this an image manifest, contain multiple things, and your blobs would be one blob is going to be a config, and the other blobs are going to be your layers.
Well, per what I understand, the artifact type should be the same as the config media type, right? So does
But-
the man like?
But that was for mapping how we're using the image manifest today to store artifacts to how this was designed. Because how this designed, we're saying we're getting rid of the whole idea of passing a separate config blob unless you need to. If you need to, then that config blob shows up as its own media type with its own blob. But when you look at the how do you build an artifact today? If I can spell open container. As our artifact repo today says, hey, if you're going to do this, that's how you do it. You should put it in that config. Is that for implementers or is that? I always click the wrong one. I never know where to find this stuff. But we tell you today, hey, if you're going to do this, you need to put this inside the config. And so we've given that direction of saying, here's the config media type for each of these things. So if you're going to push a Helm chart, it needs to go in there as that config.
Yeah, then I feel like we're being a little bit inconsistent.
Well, since artifacts don't necessarily have a, like, I mean, despite the fact that you're pushing this config blob with this media type on it, could potentially be empty, but you've got to push something in there. So you need some media type on that object. So it kind of became a de facto, here's the kind of artifact you're pushing. And if you have to put data in there, great, but you don't really necessarily have to. It kind of became overloaded, I guess is the best way of describing it, because it was required.
Okay, I anticipate this being confusing to people because it's confusing to me, and I think I might be better equipped than almost anyone on the planet to understand this.
I think the easier way to get confused is if you say I have a config blob and I want to use the artifact still. To me, the value of using the artifact is I don't have a config blob. Why do I have to push it up as an image? Why don't I just push it up without the config at all? Can you give me a format that doesn't require that? And if you look at it from that view, then it's like, well, I had a field over here that was required. This is where it fits on the other side. So we got the mapping. As soon as you say, well, I've got the config descriptor and I actually need it and I want to map it over the other side, then yeah, it does get a little confusing. No great answers. All trade-offs.
I think I'll just continue to be unhappy forever. But that's not much different than the current state of affairs.
Here, once you get a good night's sleep, at some point you're supposed to start getting happier, right? They'll eventually grow up to be teenagers.
That seems worse.
That's what I hear. I was pretty bad as a teenager, so I can attest from the other side. We did talk briefly about how to standardize references, and didn't spend too much time on this, mostly because we spent all the time up earlier. But there was a general consensus that, hey, it would be good to define the current, how we define these registry syntaxes, get that moved over into image spec. And so add another section to image spec and add a parser written in Go into image spec for parsing a reference. I don't think people fully took the second part into mind when they were making that decision. I think they glossed over that one. It was like, yeah, that's Brandon being Brandon, throwing out issues. But at least on the first part of, we've got this in distribution a day, let's get this over into image spec. There was a general consensus of, yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, I'm very upset about this state of affairs.
The OCI layout state of affairs.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's ugly. I don't even like my own at this point. I started looking at stuff and I was like, oh, that's even bad too.
Yeah.
I'm not following the RFCs as I should.
Unbelievable.
But then figure out how to take all these. Most of these don't include an option for how to pass a tag or a digest. And so if you start to do that, it gets even uglier. A lot of them just assume this is a single image, not even a multi-platform image. And yeah.
Yeah, I get people very confused about that. And it's hard to explain. It's like, yes, this is one index, which
an index can have multiple things in it.
This index is recursive in theory.
Yeah.
Have fun.
Yeah, very few people have implemented it that way. And so addressing within there has not been something that many people have covered with their implementations. So that will get very interesting soon. Yeah, the one that I'm not happy with is that the field between the second and the third slash is supposed to be a host name where you're supposed to leave it empty. So there is no relative path when you do like a file : // You're not supposed to have a relative path in there. A lot of people just ignored the spec and just said, okay, well, if you don't have a third slash in there, then it's a relative path. Potentially require that it always has a dot in there. But yeah, the RFC just says, no, not supported. You can't do that. And there were questions of whether or not we could make this a BNF, eBPNF grammar. Is it eBPNF or eBNF? I always thought it was just BNF. Anyway, if you look at the parser and distribution right now, it's not a simple follow a regex or follow a simple parser that's a state machine, because the first field in there in the path, it looks at to figure out, is it a registry or are we talking to Docker Hub? And to figure out if it's a registry or Docker Hub, the logic goes, is there a dot in the string? Is there a colon in the string? So a dot for like a domain name, a colon if you had a port number. Or is it localhost? And if it's the localhost string, then it assumes that that's also a registry at that point. And so trying to put that into a grammar, I don't know if that works.
Yesterday, because there's an official Docker Hub image with the dot in it.
In the username?
Well, if you omit a username, defaults to library. You know.
But I don't think Docker Hub has anything in their stuff that has dots in it. Do they?
He put a link to rocket.chat in the chat.
Oh.
It's legal in a repo name.
They seriously do that.
Yeah, so now I'm upset. Again.
Who let that happen? Tina, I'm filing a complaint.
Go for it.
I don't
I'll
think
route
it's
it straight to dev null.
but it's annoying because there's not a correct heuristic unless we want to like query Docker Hub to parse a string.
It sounds
That makes sense,
reasonable.
too.
Yeah.
Except there's not a way to query the existence of a repository without listing tags, which isn't really sufficient if there's no tags.
Yeah, I seem to recall that's the API that the hub people don't want you to hit. But it's probably the hub API for that, not the registry API. So maybe the registry API one's fine and you should just hit that. Doesn't it support pagination? Can't you ask for just one? I guess that's pagination controlled by the server side, huh? The server can choose to force you to paginate that result.
Yeah.
You can't ask for pagination.
You can ask for pagination.
You can?
Mhm.
But the server doesn't have to.
Correct.
So hub probably doesn't.
Let's find out.
So this one works for me, but because it's only a single entry in the path. There's no slash in there, so there's no second field.
Yeah, an organization on Docker Hub cannot have a period in it that I'm aware of. That sounds like this kind of horrible thing I would have tried 5 years ago or more when I was squatting on organization names on Docker Hub. I have a lot.
I got hit not too long ago when I tried making different organizations for things and I found out that they don't let me create them. They want me to upgrade, which I should upgrade, but just for creating an organization seems silly. That may have only been a temporary thing I haven't worked lately.
Do we want to encode the like Docker Hub stuff in the parser?
I'd like to make sure, however it parses in one place, it parses the same for everywhere. And so I'm leaning toward yes.
This precludes having a registry mounted at the root of a HTTP server. You know?
How so?
What if rocket.chat:/latest hit https://rocket.chat/v2/manifest/latest?
Can you have an empty repository, like no field for repository in general?
Sure can.
Like I'm thinking not just in the parser, but in all the APIs. You can?
Are there clients besides yours that support that, John?
Mine doesn't. Breaks.
Yeah, because in distribution, there are repositories and all over the place, right? We've got that in all kinds of sections. Got to have a tab for distribution spec in here without going around. Okay. We're in the spec for the APIs. And you're doing anything in here. Like if you do a push.
Isn't there a canonical regular expression for that name that requires it to have at least one element? I think you just scrolled past it.
Yeah.
It's in that section above.
Calling manifest.
Name must match the following regular expression.
But it's got a star.
It's got a star on that final component, yes. But the very first component has a plus.
Okay.
It's not legal, John. You're wrong.
Haha.
But I still love you.
I can't believe John violated the spec.
I didn't. My stuff doesn't work, but I've seen people who complain that they can't pull like localhost 5000:latest, you know?
Well, that's their problem, not
I
ours.
thought certainly this would work.
Yeah, that's a complaint of the spec, not a complaint of the tool. So now you can redirect them appropriately.
All
And then
right.
we'll have one issue filed on the spec that everyone can just point to of, nope, look here, this is where the feature request is, and then we'll never do anything about it.
So I will say that I wish you could list tags or list, well, I wish catalog didn't exist, but something to replace catalog exists that you could call on the root of a domain, for example, registry.case.io, to figure out what's there.
So why do you want that but don't like catalog?
Catalog only exists at the root, and you can't like list child repositories.
You can list from a certain point, but yeah, you can't list from a part of a tree.
Yeah, right. And clients expect it to like recurse and flatten, which I don't like either. But yeah. Oh well.
Yeah, that repo name is similar to labels in Gmail, where they're technically displayed hierarchical and act like they're hierarchical, but they're technically not. They're technically separate things. And it's just an implementation detail of each registry that they're typically a hierarchy.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't get me going on my IMAP mail server stuff. I've broken that a lot. So that one, I figured this, especially when you started getting into OCI dir, that we ended up making a working group. And so I'd already put up the draft and thought I was just, fishing and see if we get more support. And he said, no, just throw it straight in the image spec. We'll work on a PR on there. So I suspect the initial PR is going to be, let's capture what's in distribution today. Get that copied over into a central place. And then from there, we can start to extend and see if we want to capture and clean up this OCI layout stuff.
Is this HackMD something you'd be comfortable putting a link to in the meeting notes?
It is something
like
that I already put a link to in the meeting notes.
Wow.
Right there.
No, you didn't. That's the KubeCon meeting, HackMD.
This is the KubeCon meeting.
What? I scrolled through that whole thing and didn't see these notes in there.
Unless I've got a cached version, but yeah, it should be.
Oh, that's my bad. I got stuck on the artifact types and went, no, this can't be right.
Yeah.
It's too much data.
You get stuck in artifact type. It's easy to get stuck up there.
Yeah, sorry, that's my bad.
Up there. No, that's all right. Honestly, in the KubeCon meeting, we only spent, we were at like 15 minutes at this endpoint, so we did not spend much time on this, but we did hit quick enough to say, hey, we got into authentication authorization, all of a sudden the hand started raising saying, yes, hallelujah, we need to finally do this. So there was great rejoicing of saying, yes, we do need to include authentication authorization. People agreed that, there were a lot of useful content that was already created by people in this meeting right now. They pointed out all your nice, pretty pictures, John. And so they, which I will say, in case you've never seen them before, they do not translate very nicely when you get into dark mode.
Dark mode. Well,
sorry
about it.
That's my problem as much as yours.
Oh man.
So
graph is to not be transparent. Or that's not even graph is it?
I don't know what it is. It just looks funny to me.
Well, PR is welcome.
There we go. But yeah, there was a significant amount of approval of saying we need to do this. And they said, no, by the way, that should be a working group. So I'm working on putting together a PR of saying, let's do a working group to define auth. And that is what you missed in a nutshell. Now you don't have to go back and watch a recording. A 2-hour-long recording with a break in the middle, which every time you tell people you get a 5-minute break, you know it's going to take at least 10. At least. Yeah, I've found plenty of ways to break auth. John disapproves of me for finding ways to break his auth. But yeah,
Yeah,
it would be nice
it'd be
to specify some of this.
to find if there actually is a way to specify authentication that works with all the existing clients, because I think there's like mutually exclusive behavior that's been hard coded away in a lot of different places, or like fixed with fallbacks, and that's not great.
Yeah, I do fallbacks in my own code, which I'm not excited about. I feel like the only way we're going to find a solution that works across the board is just to say Docker is the spec, which is not ideal to me, but that might be the only answer to that question. Otherwise, if we start to step out from that and say, let's follow general RFCs and whatnot and try to adopt more standards in this, trying to make this more powerful, then we're going to start figuring out how we minimize the breaking changes in this. Or give fallbacks. But I think to your point there, that's why it needs a whole working group. Figure out all those edge cases. I was throwing questions out there of what happens when you have multiple scopes you're doing across repository blob mount for obvious reasons. Maybe not obvious reasons, but reasons that John can want to strangle me for. If we want to do fine grained access to push specific tags or media types or something like that, there's a lot of stuff along those lines. I'm well known for skipping the V2 ping. Everybody else does that V2 ping and then constructs their own headers. And I just say, yeah, screw that. Just go straight to the endpoint that I'm talking to, which I'm sure upsets some people, but I like efficiency. And then how much we want to allow the registry to dictate on their side versus do we put the logic in the clients of how the client generates stuff. I think that would be an interesting question. So there you go. Action items for a week, hit a couple of issues, summed up a whole meeting, a 2-hour-long meeting. And we got 1 minute left. Y'all want your minute back or any other questions?
Give me that minute.
I can do that. Have a great rest of the week. And yeah, harass me in the PRs. Tell me everything I'm saying is horrible. Take care.
Have a good weekend, guys.
Take care.
Bye, guys.